Well, recovery management is in our business unit's charter. It's in our name. So we live for the recovery aspects of data. And when you look at that survey and you talk about disaster recovery, whether it is backing up the data, right, after the data is backed up, whether you do it to disk or to tape or to the cloud, we actually have a tool that can make sure that we can check that we can recover that tape or we can recover that disk. So customers will have that understanding that they can retrieve that data back when and if appropriate. And on disaster recovery, when we talk about ARCserve replication, ARCserve high availability, those products are specifically designed to help you build out a disaster recovery solution. So whether you're setting up an environment across a WAN, right, where you want to fail over, whether it's your mission critical business applications or your data to, we could actually help you do that. We could help you move your data across your WAN to set up that disaster recovery site, and then with our assured recovery product, we can make sure that we can fail back to any specific point in time.
Right. Elaborate a little bit more on that one for me, just from the perspective, when you hear the phrase disaster recovery, again, people sort of think the worst. Oh, yeah. I lost a building, the city, the power grid, yep, et cetera, went down. But that's not necessarily a common disaster, no, right? And no, especially in that mid-market, a disaster can be as simple as, Chuck ran into the pole out front, and all of a sudden we have no power. Or
spilt water on the server for some...
Pepsi syndrome.
Yeah, right, the Pepsi syndrome. That happens the most often.
Probably.
Right? And when that does happen, we can actually take that server and immediately fail it over, right, to another server, whether it's located right in that same building or whether it's across the street, right? As long as we're connected through a WAN, we can fail it over to another site and then immediately move all of that data over to that exact point where that server went down. And what we find, to your point, which is disasters don't happen that often, right? Well, maintenance does, right? And sometimes you have to bring down a box, right? And usually you don't want to bring down a box during working hours, right? So now you're left to doing it after hours where you're paying double time, or you're doing it on weekends where you're spending double time. Well, you can now do maintenance on a box as well by failing it over to another box, fix up whatever you're doing on that box, and then fail that data back. And we're finding our partners are actually using that aspect of our high availability product when using it with their customers.
Great. So I think just to close off on the disaster recovery bit, it's people have, you hear, again, disaster is a subjective term. Yeah. A disaster to a little shop that can't get at their email, it might be, right, that's the biggest disaster in their world right then and there. That the other part that people get confused about a lot that we find is the presumption of disaster recovery sounds expensive and complicated and requires tremendous staffing and all sorts of financial resources, and that's not really the case.
Especially not anymore. Especially when you look at virtualization, right? And that's I'm jumping ahead a little bit. Where we tie out really well is when they could take a box that's located in another spot, virtualize that box, right, and then fail over from a physical box to a virtual instance on a box, where you could have multiple things running on that box, and it's a very cost-effective way of managing your data.
No, it's a great point, because it is, again, historical recovery, server recovery and application recovery methodologies required at least a one-to-one relationship. Yeah. And now it's not that. Now I might have 100 production servers that theoretically could all fail to a single physical server that represents 100 virtual servers.
That's right.
So the economics and all the complexities change dramatically. Yep. No, it's a great point. And then on a couple other points on this, it's funny to me that, again, no offense, you're in the backup and recovery business, but still on the top of these lists, improving backup, improving application backup and data protection still always consistently ranks at the top of IT spending priorities. This is data protection priorities, but it's always at the top of generic IT spending opportunities. Fantastic if you're in the backup and recovery business, but what are you doing to make this easier for people?
Yeah, well, we're doing, the first part of that is that you have to make sure that you have a true heterogeneous solution. Right. What is happening right now, especially with virtualization, is you have a bunch of niche vendors that are trying to create storage offerings or backup and recovery offerings. And when they look to purchase those tools, what they don't realize is they're not heterogeneous in nature. They don't cut across all the diverse applications that you're running. We cut across 20 different applications and operating systems. right? So we are very much heterogeneous in nature. Actually, our new release with ARCserve Backup, we added back in Unix and Linux as well support. So we have that both with ARCserve Backup, with ARCserve Replication, and high availability. So you're really looking at a true heterogeneous offering that works in both physical and virtual environments and cuts across all the different operating systems and all the top-tier applications.
Terrific. Yeah. So I do want to spend a little bit more time on that, but first I got to ask, before, the hottest thing in our industry, certainly in an awful long time, for the last 18 months, and it only seems to be getting hotter and hotter. Everybody's talking about dedupe. I mean, no one cared about our business for a long time, and now my grandmother's asking me about dedupe, it seems like. So where is ARCserve now, and what are your plans, and actually, where do you fit?
We're very proud on this one, because we were actually we were the first backup vendor to integrate data deduplication into backup. It was actually out in our ARCserve 12.5 release last year, and it just so happened to be right at the same time when the whole thing boiled up. And really what it comes down to, Steve, I mean, you were hitting on it earlier, it's data growth, right? And when everybody's trying to manage costs and reduce costs and data is growing exponentially, we need to find a way to solve that challenge. So what we have done from a cost standpoint is we've said, we're not going to charge you for another product, right? We're actually going to take data deduplication and add it as a feature to ARCserve Backup. So it actually works right with ARCserve Backup.
No incremental costs?
No incremental costs. It's all in the base price of the product, right? So you don't have to go out, as some of our competitors have now done, which is also release a data dedupe product. They're just catching up with us a year later, but they're also charging a separate price for just that feature. So that's where we feel like we stand out. You know, when you buy a backup product, it should give you the ability to reduce the amount of data that you're backing up during that process. So yes, we have included it as part of our product, and it's been out for over a year now, and we just continue to enhance it as we go.
There's got to be probably tremendous ancillary benefit from just not having to back up the same stuff once you've deduplicated it again and again. Well, right, so that window needs to come down, I would think.
It helps on network bandwidth, and it helps on disk space, right? Both of those two things. And overall, it helps them just improve their operational efficiency.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's a great point. Second hottest topic in the world, especially in our spot right now, virtualization. And this is another interesting one. So as hot as deduplication is as a technology and as a discussion point, and as fired up as people can get around the pros and cons of all of this kind of stuff, it's nothing in overall comparison to just the electricity and the pure buzz that's been generated in the virtualization world. I mean, it's been great for every part of the IT business, quite frankly. A lot of people would say it's a long time coming, but regardless, it's here and it's not going away anytime soon. So research tells us that as popular and as wonderful as server virtualization is and will continue to be, that it's been adopted very widely, but not very deep. So people are still in the first inning, if you will, of ubiquitous deployment in terms of overall server virtualization. But even so, right, and it'll continue to accelerate is our opinion on that, but even so, even in the early stage, customers are finding that just because you're going virtual versus physical, it's no easier to support and manage a virtual machine than it is a physical one, necessarily. There are certain absolute consolidation benefits that everybody gets that are inarguable, but 1,000 virtual machines is just as hard, and you could argue harder to manage than 1,000 physical machines. At least you could see those physical ones. And now, because of our ability and with all the sprawl and the ease of just creating machines ad hoc at will, we're actually creating more backup and recovery problems than we've ever had before. And so I'm just curious as to what your experience is there.
This is